Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Dr. Terence Jackson. Those of you who have watched the show before know that Grace Under Pressure focuses on what's too often called the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we care for others. And when you do this as a leader, it means you bring people together for common cause and you energize them, bring them together for the right reasons. And Terry Jackson, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show, and I want to tell folks all about you. So,
thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Great. Terry's a two-time guest here. So he, like me, is a member of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches. Unlike me, he is consultant to the United States State Department and has a Ph.D. and a whole bunch of other things. He teaches has taught in undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate programs. And he is a much in-demand consultant and multi-book author. And today we are going to talk about Terry's newest book, which is called Co-Creation Leadership. I'm really excited about this book, and Terry's got some good ideas to share with us. So welcome, my friend, Terry Jackson.
Yes, sir, John. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. We have such great conversations, and you're such a great host and a great guy. I really enjoy talking with you and trying to solve the world's problems, right?
Well, between us, we'll do our best in the next 29 and a half minutes here, Terry. So anyway, so co-creation leadership. What's the theory behind that, Terry?
Well, what's really behind co-creation leadership was the fact that we've been through this pandemic, right? Or we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And what it's really showed us is the fragility of humanity, right? And it showed us that we as humans are not as strong as we think we are. And in order to really accomplish a lot across the globe, we really need to co-create. We need to come together, and we need to understand that co-creation is really our superpower to do so.
Right. Well, I like the idea of that, because when we think of leadership and all its dimensions, be they executive or peer-to-peer or self, the idea of cooperation doesn't enter, or co-creation doesn't. But I love how you just described it. So, and now more than ever, do we need people to come together? So,
yes.
So when you pitch the idea, because I know you are a busy consultant, advisor, and coach, and they talk about co-creation, what's the first reaction, Terry?
When I pitch co-creation, I really talk a little bit about the framework. And as I was talking through and walking through the creation of the book, I tossed out some words that were important to me. And as I tossed out those words, I realized that those words really spelled recipe.
Which is my cue to cue up our graphic there. I'm a little short on that.
And so as we think about recipe, we think about something good or delicious that our mothers or our grandmothers or that we've cooked for ourselves. And we think about all the ingredients that go into it to make the dish well. And so as we look at it from an applicable perspective in everyday life, everything we do, there's a recipe, something we put in and something that we get out of it.
I like that, because you and I were talking before the show, and you said kind of my words, if I remember, life's a recipe, and we're adding to it or taking away from it and working on our product the product. And I guess in a way we're never really, certainly when it comes to leadership, we're never really finished, are we, Terry? So,
no, it is a continuous journey of leadership, because there's so many dynamics that change on a minute-to-minute or moment-to-moment basis that we have to constantly be stirring the pot, to ensure that there's enough of the same elements in the recipe to make it taste good. And tasting good means that there's organizational rhythm, and the organization is actually functioning effectively and efficiently as it should.
Okay, now I want to delve into the concepts a little further here. And you talk about co-creation as it's a commitment, but not just results, but revolutionary results. What are revolutionary results, Terry? So,
Well, let's look at the time that we're in with the pandemic, and we talk about revolutionary results, right? That means we have to invest in our people. We have to invest in the infrastructure of the organization, and to go bigger than that, let's talk about the infrastructure of this country and the infrastructure across the globe. So we're looking to create more opportunities because you can't cost cut your way to growth. So the only way to grow is through co-creation and investment in people to drive revolutionary results. I'm not sure about you, John, and where you are in Michigan, but in North Carolina, as I drive around and I see all of these fast food places that are closed simply because there are staffing issues. And the staffing issues, they're not either paying the people well, or the people are receiving more from unemployment, or whatever the supply chain issues are, so they don't have the supplies, or the food to open. And then there are other businesses that are following suit with that. So it's obvious that we have to look at doing business a different way, and that calls for a co-creation way in which we can not get back to where we are, because I don't like the phrase the new normal, because normal didn't work for a lot of people. But we have to co-create, and what we have to do is realize the new reality in which we live.
okay. Now, your next concept, and it's something that everyone talks about, but it's execution. And I like you phrase it as ideas are okay, but nothing without execution. So, why are we so hung up on failure to execute, Terry? I mean, it seems so simple. So,
It seems it's like our good friend Marshall Goldsmith says, it's simple, but it's not easy, right? And what happens is execution basically is saying is, here's what I'm going to do, and then you do it. But for whatever reason, the doing it, there's a problem. There's a gap there. And so we don't execute it. And I'm sure you know the number one challenge in corporate America is the lack of execution. A company saying that, hey, we're going to make 10 widgets, and all of a sudden we make 8 widgets, and we accept 8 widgets is good, but they didn't execute against what they said they were going to do. So we have to be able to inspire our people, have the right processes, so that we can drive that performance and execute as we say we're going to do.
you know, we've been wrestling with the idea of execution ever since I've been around here, and same you, and somewhat 30 years, whatever, for me. And but I think that one of the things I think about, and I think this is why your book is so important, because it's co-creation. I think that yes, execution is hard, but I think executives get bored with execution because it's no longer creative. Do you have a take on that, Terry?
I would agree. I would think that they do get bored, and what has to be a part of the co-creation is curiosity. Curiosity drives you to execute, because you're asking the questions of why and what if and how, right? And so that doesn't allow you to be bored, because what you're trying to do is use curiosity to create that moment, or those moments of executions that are actually needed, right? And just because you execute against something once doesn't mean it's going to happen the same way twice. So that means you have to go back to the curiosity again, and therefore you have to revisit co-creation again.
Right. And I like how you do this, the curiosity, because I think it's so essential, and it's one of those leadership characteristics, I think, that shunted to the side. So when you say we ask questions, to whom should we be asking questions, Terry?
Well, one, as leaders, we should not only ask questions of ourselves, but we should ask questions of those who are actually involved in the day-to-day execution of the business. People participate in what they help create. And if they're asked the questions to help formulate the solution, one, they're going to feel involved. And so now we get into employee engagement. We get into alignment, because employees will let you know whether or not the organization is aligned or misaligned. But you won't find out those types of those kinds of answers if you're not asking the questions, right? And you have to be able to ask the right question at the right time. But it makes a leader seem more part of the organization and the people who are actually doing the work by including them and asking them.
And you're so right. And the thing is that we sometimes we'll have conversations with executives, especially, and it's so often you will say what you've just been saying, but do you ever get, well, I hear that, Terry, but I'm just too busy to go out and so so I mean, again, that's a problem. So
it's a problem all the time. You hear it all the time. I'm like, well, if you're too busy, then all you're doing basically is managing the P&L. You're managing the balance sheet, right? All of that, all of the P&L and all of the balance sheet is created by the people who are executing against the task on a day-to-day basis. So you must go out and see and talk to the people.
And the other part of that, and this is where execution does require work. You go where the work is. The concept of Gemba is in Japanese tradition or of Kaizen, but also I think we have to just be there and listen. Am I right, Terry?
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I mean, I think that listening is probably the most important element of the communication process, because people will tell you not only what you want to hear, but what you necessarily need to hear in order to be effective and to truly understand who they are and what their experience is as they work through the processes on a day-to-day basis.
I like what you said, and people need to hear, and that's where the leadership. I think your idea of the leadership co-creation is accessible because it's if I have skin in the game and you have skin in the game, then I'm a part owner of this, and so I'm going to speak up. Do you find that, Terry? So,
all of the time, when you have those leaders who truly empower their employees, right, to speak their mind, to help look for better ways of executing, better ways of being as an organization, you get that loyalty, right? And people, it's like, organizations, but you begin to hear words like, we feel like a family within this organization, because they understand that every conversation is not going to be a good conversation. There's going to be some anxious, intense moments, but they understand that it's for the greater good of the organization that they have those conversations.
Well, you just leads naturally into the next concept of when you talk to family, and maybe another word is culture. So I know your book focuses on culture, and you tie it to the word why. What was your thinking behind that, Terry?
Well, as I thought about culture and I tied it to the word why, what I was thinking about is the mere existence of the organization. Why does it exist? Does the culture actually support the why of the organization? It's the leader's job to ensure that the culture supports the why, the purpose, for being, right? For doing what you do, which is greater than the profits and it's greater than the product that you're actually selling or a service that you're selling. But it's, why do you exist for the greater good, not only of the organization, but the greater good of society?
Great. And I guess the broader the net, then maybe more people feel that they have a voice than they feel they own the culture. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely. I'm sure we've both been in some organizations where you walk around and you get a sense of the culture. You start asking questions and you get a feel. And some of them, don't feel as well. But there are other organizations where people are, they're highly spirited. They're energetic. They're open in answering questions. They're open to introducing you to new ideas. And so with that type of culture is where you get, I'm gonna call it a culture of, there's always exploration, always discovery, right? And that discovery is always based around, how do we become better as an organization? How do I become better as an individual contributor to the organization, such that I can become better and the organization becomes better?
I like this. Tell me a little bit more about encouraging self-discovery. If I'm a manager, Terry, how would I do that? So,
Well, let's go back to the as a manager. Let's go back to the coaching process of asking the questions of you know what inspires an individual. What is it that you're going to get out of here on a day-to-day basis? What level of curiosity do you have? What ways can you become better? What ways can the organization uh, become better? And finding out the strengths and the weaknesses, and then providing that necessary feed forward, such that a person can continue to develop themselves, um, and develop others around them as well.
okay, no, that's great. And so, how can and that's a time honored process, and even though it's time honored, it's time honored because it works,
Yes,
and it requires a commitment to it. So, but also, how about this? How, if I'm a manager, how do I encourage people to be curious or cooperate or innovate on a team basis? How does the co-creation model enhance that, Terry? So,
well, I think it's about intention. I think it's I think it's really about intention, right? Understanding your intention as an individual contributor and as an organization and as a team, how you come together and how you're empowered to say, hey, here is a challenge that we're facing. We want you guys to go solve it. I don't necessarily need to give you the solution, but let you work the process to find a solution, right? It's about
yeah.
the process of discovery, the process of inquiry, right? It's about the process of testing and retesting, and also understanding that the word failure doesn't exist, right? What exists is you've tried something, you just didn't do it the right way, so we need to try it another way in order to find the right way to do it.
I love the way you frame that as, okay, here's the challenge, here's the issue. Now go out and solve it. And if you have the right people, the right blend, they will take that and go run with it. So,
Absolutely.
okay. And that's what it encourages, that co-creation. So, you have said that, we did talk earlier about revolutionary results, but you also balance that with the concept of evolution in the sense of learning. Explain that, Terry? So,
Well, each and every day, what the co-creation model does is it encourages people to evolve, not to necessarily gauge yourself or compare yourself to others, but compare yourself to yourself and say, how can I be a better Terry today than I was yesterday? And also, how can I be a better Terry tomorrow than I am today? And so it's always about pushing the envelope or challenging the status quo, if you will. So you continue to evolve, and part of being curious allows one to continue to evolve as a human being, as an employee, as a part of an organization. And then that circle goes right back to revolutionary results, because what normally happens is through constant evolution, you have that epiphany that now takes it to a revolutionary perspective, right?
yep.
Because that's why we talk about disruption in organizations, because we have this continuous improvement, and then all of a sudden there's an aha moment where there's a disruption that takes you to a whole different stratosphere.
Right. Well, this leads naturally into the structure of your book, Co-Creation Leadership. Tell me about the interior design of this. You had an interesting concept to it. So,
Well, as we evolve on a day-to-day basis, as we face different opportunities on a day-to-day basis, I wanted to make this kind of a journal so that you can go into it, or a leader can use this journal to take a look at different quotes, but also to write down your thoughts about what happened in that specific instance as it relates to the quotes in the book. So it's a living, breathing document or journal, if you want to call it a personal strategic plan as a leader to walk through on a day-to-day basis, such that you can document your thoughts, you can come back to them, and you can see whether or not you're co-creating or not.
Great. I like that because you make it, you lay out the concept of co-creation and bringing people together and stuff, but then you bring it back to us, me, the reader, me, the leader, and I want your thoughts, and you give us a structure for that. So what do people tell you when you say, I want you to journal your thoughts? What kind of feedback do you get from that, Terry?
It's easier said than done, because it's about creating a habit, right?
Yeah.
It's about creating of every day, being able to focus on your thoughts, be able to journal them, and then being able to come back to them. So it's easier said than done, but it gets to discipline, right? Because there's a discipline in disruption. There's a discipline for those who develop revolutionary results. There's a discipline for those who know how to execute. So part of the co-creation process with the journaling is also showing you how to execute on a day-to-day basis, which should help you execute not from a journal perspective, but from an employment or a work perspective as well.
No, and you lay it out easily. I don't know. There's 125 at least points that you can comment on. So the whole structure is there. And I'll say this: you end up, if you follow Dr. Terry's advice, you will end up writing your own playbook. Will you not, Terry?
Absolutely. That is the point. Here's a playbook that you can create for yourself. And it will actually not only help you, but it'll help others. And as you develop those habits of execution and purpose, it will help you further along. And you can always go back and revisit this recipe as the dynamics in the marketplace change.
And I can see a use for this too, because if I'm the boss, the leader, the manager of the team, and I want to make my notes in here, but I want my team involved, and gee, I guess I'd have to buy extra copies of that too, wouldn't I, Terry?
Yes, you could. Extra buying extra copies is always a good thing, John. I'm sure you know that.
That's great. But I'm thinking here, Terry, work with me. I'm helping you sell your book. No, but I think seriously, more seriously, this could be done as a team exercise too, could it not? I mean.
Absolutely, and that was part of the intention, is that you can do it as an individual or you can do it as a team. When you go into your weekly meetings or your bi-weekly meetings or your coaching sessions, you can use this as quote unquote a playbook, or as someone has told me, as a Bible for how to co-create, how to work together, how to work through the processes, the challenges that you face, so that you can come out of the side much better.
And not to beat a dead horse on this thing, but I think it's important, even if it's a team exercise, everyone should have his or her own copy, because they need their thoughts. And that gets back to what you said about the discipline of execution, of co-creation. And so, but it also gets to something, when we write our thoughts, it means we're reflecting and we're thinking. And I think, Terry, sometimes in our management culture, we don't spend enough time thinking because we're, quote, too busy. Do you ever encounter that?
I agree with you 100%. I think, and there have been a couple of books that I've actually signed. I said the purpose of this book is to provoke thought, right? That's why the quotes. I want to know, given any situation, how a leader is thinking in a situation as he reflects and or reads these quotes, and then to go back and reflect on his thoughts about these quotes, the situation, how it could have been handled a little bit different. And so it is intended to provoke thought as well as action.
And that's good. And I like it because I think and that gets back to your original concept. It's part of a recipe, is it not? Considered a metaphor of your recipe book. And, good chefs or cooks, they will find notes in their recipe books and things. So,
Absolutely. And when you think about it as a recipe, as you said, you jot down the recipe, you change it a little bit, you tweak it a little bit. But from a more business perspective, it's a system as well, right? It's a system where all of the dots connect around all of the elements that are important to a business or a community or a society really surviving and thriving.
Well, Terry, that's because I know your work and I know your methodology, and you are a systemic thinker, and you're always linking always this to this to this, and so it's process oriented, but you don't hem people in. It's systemic, but it's open ended. Would you agree or not? So.
I would agree that it is systemic and it enables it or allows for creativity at the same time, because that's what that thinking should allow for creativity, right? It should allow for the question, what if, and what if brings about a lot of potential scenarios.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because just because I have a process, which I'm all committed to process, certainly in coaching, that doesn't negate creativity. I think it opens the door to it because we have somewhat of a framework and we know if we're headed in the right direction or need to make a turn. Would you agree or not?
I would agree 100% with you. You have to be able to actually, as a coach, understand who your client is, and as they begin to respond to some of that stimuli may not be anything that you anticipated. And so the creativity allows you to bring in other elements from other components, given what that stimuli was or what that trigger was for you, that allows you to be creative as a coach to help them ultimately achieve what they're trying to get out of the coaching engagement.
And that's what co-creation is, because it's new things, new situations. The old saying that, plans are wonderful until engage the first action or the bullet flies or whatever. That's right. And that's where your concept of creation and leadership, and it's inherent that there will be flexibility and change. Correct?
At the very central component of this are people, right? We have a tendency to think a lot about technology and all that technology does and allows us to do. But this gets back to the fundamental that people are the most important asset that we have, because all of these ideas, all of this creativity is coming from the minds of people.
Absolutely. Brings us in. Terry, we are racing through this show, and you know that I invite all of our guests to share a story or an example of grace. So I know you shared one the last time. Do you have something you want to add that may be related to this concept? So,
it's quite interesting because you mentioned listening earlier. And the importance of listening. And I mentioned that it's probably the most important piece of the communication process. Well, I learned a great lesson as I was having a conversation with my daughter about a week ago, and we were talking about different career paths she was considering. And I was coming from the place of having all of this experience and talking about relating to it from my experience. But I wasn't really listening to her and what her experience is or was or what she was wanting to do. And so she let me know very clearly that I wasn't listening to her. And so, that goes back to at the very beginning of the year. I said that I wanted to become the world's greatest listener, right? Because I'd realized that there were some opportunities for me to be a better listener. And she reminded me of that about a week or so ago. So that's the story of grace, because she taught me that lesson, or she brought me back into what my goal is for the year, and that's to be the world's greatest listener.
Well, that's great. I love that. And bless your daughter, and good for her to reminding of you and putting you into your place, my friend. So,
yes,
Terry, how can people find you? So,
Well, you have a website. You can go to jcgconsultinggroup.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Terence Jackson, Ph.D. I even play around on Facebook a little bit, so you can find me on Facebook as well, Terry Jackson. And I think we have a 100 Coaches website where you can go and you can find me as well as all of my other peers, to include John there as well. So.
And Co-Creation Leadership is available on Amazon. So you can get your copy. The notes will be there. Terry, thanks for spending time with us today. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend.
Thank you so very much, John. It was my pleasure.